some questions for you to ponder upon. What are the roles that we can play as the youth in the nation's development? How can we contribute and project our voices to the upper levels and make these ideas work?
So, as the saying goes in our national language, Pemuda Harapan Bangsa, Pemudi Tiang Negara. Youths are the foundation of the nation. Per contra, the pandemic and the current economic environment has hindered our youth from unleashing their full potential.
To delve further into this topic, we shall continue with our economic agenda, maneuvering the new reality for youth to 2025 and beyond.
So let us welcome our speakers onto the stage. First, to Ms. Koh Yu Ling, Regional Political Economist, Senior Fellow of Sustainability, Singapore Institute of International Affairs.
Mr. Yasuhiko Masuda, Country Manager for Malaysia, World Bank.
Mr. Wan Suhaimi Wan Muhammad Saidi, Senior Vice President, Head of Economic Research, Kenanga Investment Bank.
Professor Yakin Leng, Senior Fellow and Director of the Economic Studies Program, Jeffrey Shah Institution on Southeast Asia.
And ladies and gentlemen, the moderator, Mr. Dan Jaigan, Research and Research Development Manager, Asia School of Business. Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, we shall pass the stage for the economic agenda to discuss on the maneuvering the new reality for youth 2025 and beyond.
Over to you, Mr. Tan.
Alright, thank you. Thank you to the MCs. So hi, good afternoon everyone. And I think, you had a long session until right now. And I hope that, I'm happy to see that everybody's energy is still up. So let me introduce myself first. So I'm Zaigan, or Zai. So I am the research manager at the Asia School of Business, which is just across the street, right? So I manage two of the research centers that we have had there, ASEAN Research Center and the Center of Technology, Strategy and Sustainability. So I think before I introduce our speakers, I sort of just to give an idea, right, of what we want to talk about today. I think youth of today, and I myself, I think I'm not that many years ahead of you guys, honestly. We face a lot of headwinds in our own future, right? While unemployment, right, is relatively low today, the slow growth in wages and skills mismatch in the kind of jobs that is available out there and the kind of qualification that we have will pose a risk to our future livelihood. Now, this is especially so when skills biased technology adoption could happen, right? So some technologies, when they come in, will augment the kind of skill sets that we have, but it might also replace some of the other skill sets that we have. And this is kind of risk that will happen to our jobs. And I think beyond that, right, the question of social protection and retirement income may also be affected, right, due to this sort of changes, right, in our job scope. So what are the kind of economic policies that can be pursued, and what can we as a youth do, right? So, and I think you might see the Slido later. What we're going to do is we'll have a conversation here first, and then later you can ask questions through Slido, which should appear in a bit, right? Okay, so I think let me first introduce our speakers. So Ms. Koh Yu Ling, so she's the research head at Seginam Advisors, a boutique economic consultancy specializing in market research, policy and risk. And Yu Ling has done many work on the political economy of Malaysia, households, debt, employment and migrants. And next to her is Dr. Yasuhiko Masuda. He is the World Bank Country Manager for Malaysia, now leading a team based in the World Bank Inclusive Growth and Sustainable Finance Hub in KL. Dr. Masuda is an expert on public sector governance and human development, primarily in the service delivery for social protection, education and health, with over 25 years experience in various technical and managerial roles in the World Bank. Next to him is Mr. Wan Suhaimi. So he joined the Kenanga Investment Bank in 2006 as the head of economic research, and he has more than 30 years of working experience and as an economist covering the financial market. He currently also sits on the board of trustees of the Malaysian Tax Research Foundation. And finally, we have Prof. Ya Kim Ling at the far end. He is the Professor of Economics and Director of Economic Studies program at Jeffrey Cha Institute on Southeast Asia at Sunway University. And prior joining to academia, he's a practicing economist in the private sector for over 20 years, and also serving as a chief economist at the country's premier local credit rating agencies and other positions. So welcome to everyone here. So I think to start us off with, let's take a sort of global look, and that's where I would like to ask ask Yashriku. So I think Malaysia is an important part of our global value chain, right? And so the employment that we have here in Malaysia can be very much impacted by changes in the global economic trend. So what do you think are some of the significant challenge to the work of the future for our Malaysian youth?
That was because I didn't turn it on. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the question. That's a big one. And first of all, thank you very much to the organizer. Congratulations as well. And it's really a pleasure to be here. And we happen to be sitting upstairs on the third level, the World Bank, and borrowing a piece of Sasana Kijan. So really happy to see a lot of faces here. I've been here for about a year, and I actually didn't even know that this thing existed in the basement because it was locked up. And we're not allowed to go in because of the COVID restrictions. So it's really nice to see this change and so many faces, especially young faces. So back to the question. Indeed, it's good to think about this big trend that's happening. I think the world is changing before our eyes. The global economy is changing at the same time. And so this thing about the shift in global value chains is one aspect of it. And because a lot of it has to do with what's happening in and around China. And we are near China. This is very directly impacting this part of the world, right? But also I think it's good to keep in mind that it is a manifestation of the larger changes that are happening. Some of the things that we might have taken for granted. So, and I'm from Japan. Japan, like Malaysia, benefited from the period of stability in the world, after the World War II, where the United States basically provided the umbrella for security and then cushion for the economy, absorbing a lot of the exports coming from Asian countries, right? And we rode on that wave for decades. That wave ended, right? But still, for the last 2-3 decades, we were then enjoying this globalization wave where there was still relative stability and increasing flows of goods and people across national boundaries. Now it looks like that pattern it's not stopping, but slightly moving in a different direction. I think the flow of people and goods will continue, but the ways and the directions may be changing because of primarily political considerations, right? Now, so what is the change in global value chains, and especially as this might affect countries like Malaysia? To a large extent, we're talking about production moving away from China, right? And that actually creates opportunities for some countries. So Malaysia, especially in the electrical and electronics industry, the demand has increased, and I think the sector grew something like 20% between this year and last year. So that's a benefit. But Malaysia is not the only country benefiting. So some of the production that may have moved out of China, for example, if it's automotive, it's probably gone to Thailand. Right? So Malaysia, not everything is coming to Malaysia. Then what's happening? One way to look at it may be that it could be more of the same. So more production of the things that Malaysia already knows how to produce because of its comparative advantage. If Thailand has comparative advantage in automobile, it goes there, right? The question is that what Malaysia needs, and is that what you want? And I would say that maybe not. What Malaysia needs is to change the way the economy is structured so that you can start making and selling more sophisticated products. So it's not to compete with Thailand for automobile factories moving out of China. It's to compete with Korea and Taiwan for higher end computer chips and other products. Another way to look at this is the impact of the global value chain shift is to think about where the driver of growth and jobs may be in Malaysia. And it's no longer in manufacturing. It's important, and especially in the export segment. But actually it's domestic consumption and services, right? And that's where the jobs are. 60% of the jobs in Malaysia are in services. So these are now coming from China, yeah? And so, it's important to recognize this trend, ride the wave, making sure that, you don't miss out on the opportunities that come. And I know that I visited Penang a few weeks ago. Some companies are already thinking about how this might be an opportunity. And, some people are saying one way in which Malaysia can take advantage is to maintain neutrality between China and the US. Let's see, how easy that is in the geopolitical sense. But, it made sense to me from a business person's point of view as I heard it. I'm not a business person, so, I don't have a particular insight there, but, it sounded to me, it seemed like it made sense. So it's important to ride the wave, but it's important to keep an eye on the longer term goals, the longer term vision for the country. And I think this global value chain thing is a short-term thing. That I don't think that's really changed in the longer-term prospect for what Malaysia needs to do to really reach, as the World Bank likes to say here in Malaysia, reach the high-income status, but not just in the statistical sense, right? In a truly affluent society where people have high-paying jobs and they can enjoy higher quality of life. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Yasuko. I think it's very interesting to then see where Malaysia is placed. So maybe I would like to go to Prof. Yan, right? To actually, so how about to look back, right? Given all of this, potential changes and what Malaysia can do, one thing we see is that unemployment in Malaysia seems to be kind of like stable for a while, right? It's not very high compared to say what we hear in say Europe and so on a couple of years ago, right? So there's still worries, right, in terms of unemployment and in terms of job that actually youth are voicing out. So they're wondering what you think, right, are the pain points that are triggering these worries.
Thank you very much. Now the unemployment situation in Malaysia, as if you look around the region as well as the global setting, you'll find that during the pandemic, there has been a disproportionate impact on youth as well as other vulnerable groups. But overall, since the recovery, especially 2021 and up to recent first and second quarter, you find that the unemployment, which shot up to more than 50% at the peak of the pandemic, when there was a accompanying downturn of the sharp downturn, contraction of the economy by 5.6%. Now, I think now you'll find that the current unemployment rate is relatively manageable at around 4.3% at the latest indicator. Now, I think the big challenge here is that the youth unemployment still remains relatively high. It used to be double digit, 10, 11, 12%, hovering now around that level, but recently has edged down to around 8.1, 8.2%. Now, I think that's not the major problem confronting Malaysia, because our labor market is kind of segmented. You see, we have a shortage of at both ends of the skill spectrum. On one hand, the low end where there's the labor intensive, the unskilled segment of the industry. We have a high strong demand where there's a shortage of unskilled foreign workers. So that's on the other hand. And on the other upper end, there's a shortage of so-called skilled talents. But those are in very specific sectors where, for example, in these emerging technologies, all these, you find the shortage at both ends. You see. So the challenge for us is the mismatch, skills mismatches, especially the fact that we have what we call underemployment. So rather than unemployment issue facing Malaysia, it's actually the underemployment, whereby we find that there's a large segment of graduates that are employed in sectors or jobs or occupations that are below their skills or their training levels. So that's one problem. The other problem is the low wages. And the World Bank study has found that skilled wages in Malaysia has remained relatively stagnant for the last 10 to 20 years, almost 2 decades. So if you ask some of us, our starting salary in the 70s and 80s is about 2000, 2005, and currently if you ask some of the, what's the starting pay for graduates, it's still around that level. So that's a major challenge. So what is the cause, the underlying cause? Now to me it would be first, I think we need a more dynamic investment sector, especially private investment. So a more vigorous private investment activities will actually drive up the demand because of the so-called the slack in the labor market, the mismatch in terms of labor supply and demand, and then the skills mismatches. And of course, the other main challenge is actually to how we can create more high-value, high-wage jobs that are driven by technology, that are knowledge-intensive, that are so-called in the high-tech sectors where the wages are higher. So I think that for Malaysia, the structure of the economy, we have to restructure the economy to move up the value chain, and that continuous upgrading is very important. And we have a chicken and egg problem in the sense of supply versus demand, whether we can create sufficient demand, and that's where I think a focus on very strong focus on investment is very, very important to as the horse to pull the cart. The cart would be the supply of skills and the graduates that are produced by our universities. So I think important focus now, I would think that is very important to actually strengthen the investment environment, to stimulate entrepreneurial activities, to encourage more indigenous technological innovations and developing our own capabilities. Of course, we can rely on foreign direct investment, but importantly, that the shift towards what we call innovation-based growth that relies on our own technological capabilities that are developed domestically or through our own university industry collaboration, especially for science graduates that are the graduates that are in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. These are the fields that are currently, I think, if we can drive up the so-called the skills and the technological level, and that will help to solve the high-end problem. And of course, at the lower-end problem, you can still rely on unskilled foreign workers, but you have to manage it carefully. So I think, in short, Malaysia's unemployment and underemployment problem can be resolved through policies that have a strong investment focus to attract more domestic as well as foreign direct investment, and then importantly, focus on entrepreneurship, whereby our young generation, given the rise of internet age, you have vast opportunities to create new businesses, new business models based on e-commerce, and now, of course, the shift towards Web 3.0 and all that. All these are presenting opportunities for those with the right skills and aptitude, as well as the appropriate mentoring and exposure to the new business opportunities, including the basic e-commerce like buying and selling through the internet. You can open up a vast spectrum of opportunities, especially for the low and middle income groups. And then on the higher end, skills. I think skills will be the key so-called missing ingredient in terms of Malaysia's formula for structural transformation to move up to to reach our high income targets.
All right. Thanks, Prof. Yeah. So I think from our two speakers, you hear a lot of I think two things, right? One, really the need to transform the economy, some structural transformation to ride the next wave. But at the same time, also then the importance of skills coming in. So I think but my next question is to Yuling, right? I think when we think about skills and the structural economy, we think sometimes we tend to forget, right? We may be just thinking about urban workers, right? So I'm curious to hear from you in terms of what do you think about I think rural and agriculture areas, right, as Felda areas, the youth there face challenges which are a bit different, quite different perhaps, from urban areas, including perhaps fewer job opportunities and incomes. So just, what do you think are some of these challenges, right, for youth in those areas?
Okay, yeah, thank you for the question. I thought I'd share a little bit about what I've been observing in my work stream, which is mostly to do with agriculture and commodities. Of course, palm oil is such a big thing here, and I think you'll probably also realize that whenever there's some sort of financial crisis or crunch, commodities has helped Malaysia out tremendously. The oil and gas prices or palm oil prices, there's this huge uptick in prices, and it's come down quite a bit, but it's still very high historically. And so I think in this sense, we do have a general election around the corner, so I think our rural sector will be a lot happier because prices are still at multi-year highs, not as fantastic, but it's pretty good. But maybe also just to reflect that, I think we had earlier a talk about poverty alleviation. I think a lot of you would be aware from the headlines and discussions that palm oil is very important here. It had a huge role in poverty alleviation. But of course, fast forward a couple of decades, we do have quite a big rural population build-up. And I think this is where, when I was delving into some of the Department of Statistics Malaysia data, it was quite interesting to try to disaggregate households with one income earner, two income earners, three income earners. Often the lady in the rural household doesn't earn, so it does mean that if you've got two or three income earners, it's actually the second generation, the next generation, the younger generation, and things. And this is where actually I put it up. If you look for me in LinkedIn, Yuling Core, my talking points are there with some charts and things if you're interested to happen to look at it. But I think this is where I was looking at things previous to the last general election. Obviously, things will look a bit different now with commodity prices up. People will be happier. But there's a strong contrast between, say, if you're somebody living in rural in Johor, which is, well, actually a lot of it is semi-urban already because of proximity and development there, versus, say, somebody in Pahang. And I'll just mention, I know this is a little bit dated data, but it kind of raises the question of, why does it look as though the second earner in a Pahang rural household is earning way below minimum wage? So I think these things need to be looked at. There's great regional disparity that we have within Malaysia regions. And you should look at, say what Johor looks like. I mean, this is the second point I want to quickly raise as well, because I look a lot at the, because I do some write-ups for Singapore media at one stage, and the whole topic of conversation was the Singapore-Johor economic corridor. And of course, the gradient is quite big there, right? I mean, straight away, ringgit to dollar, you're earning 3 times more, but of course, you have this horrible commute across the causeway. And I think this is where, the politicians in Johor are scratching their heads. We want this high-speed, high-speed connection there. People are trying to sell property. Of course, things have gotten a little bit awry because of COVID and rising interest rates. But, these things come into question. And I think also part of it is to look a bit more closely again. I think you'll notice quite a few speakers here look at Department of Stats data. It's very underutilized, and I hope more of you will use it. There's so many nuggets of info there. I mean, I went and looked at, say, a Johor Bahru urban household, looking at their household income, their expenses, and then noticed that, the expenses is all based on rentals. So I thought, okay, why don't I just put in household debt, we do have something like 70-80% home ownership, car ownership, and motorcycle ownership. So I just put it in. And, guess what? The household surplus, once you take the income and expenditure out with this, imputed, I just went into those calculators online, right? Mortgage calculator, you own a motorbike, very modest. Basically, I caused the household surplus to fall by 38%. And that's for the urban setting. And for the rural setting, it fell by 16%. So I think, I know some of our topic was to do with debt and income and things, so I think there's something to be looked on a bit carefully. Malaysia does have high household debt already. Anecdotally, I know some of you have, good jobs. A friend of mine was HR in one of the big agencies here, and is saying that, gosh, they garnish their salary 100% to pay for everything. So, I think this is going to be what's going to, be offered to a lot of you, something to look out for, and even at the policy level, to wonder about, how well household debt, even personal debt, is being tracked on it. I think you need to be aware, both personally and as well as, in the work that you do, because this does affect things like, consumers, how healthy and how confident are consumers actually. Because if we look at certain data, it looks kind of positive, but once you try to impute other costs into it, it does look a little bit, interesting, if not difficult. And I guess my last point is, again, a bit on the rural thing, but I think it has overflow effects into other sectors as well, because we have this really interesting situation of really heavy migrant workers here, right? You're talking about 15% of the workforce is migrant workers. And this is a largely youth audience, and I know we're talking about really extremes here, as what was mentioned, about low end and high end. But sometimes I wonder at the definitions, because if you look at palm oil, is it right to call the person who's wielding a sickle or something on top of a 20-foot pole, cutting down a fruit with 2 swishes? Is that really unskilled? Sometimes I wonder whether that's the right definition. But of course, Malaysia the system is run on piece rates. So it makes it very difficult. The recognition is not there. But now we have labor crunch, right? 30% shortages across so many sectors. And this was also interesting that I was talking to various people, and I started to realize that actually I'm not sure whether Malaysia can afford to hire so many migrant workers anymore. If I take the example of palm oil and the rural sector, we have Taiwan, which in the last 2-3 years has changed their migrant worker policy and is interested to hire Southeast Asian workers, right? And we have Australia who's also interested to do it. So again, this whole Johor Bahru, Singapore example, guess what? If you're a worker in a plantation or farm, if you go to Taiwan, you're going to earn at least twice more. If you go to Australia, you're going to earn at least 3 times more. So if you're the Indonesian, agency that is improving migrant workers' rights and outcomes, interestingly, they passed this in their legislation a couple of years ago. That's why you have, Indonesian ambassador fighting with our ministries for their human rights, on their worker rights. So, they would probably tell the 10,000 workers who want to come to work in Malaysian plantation, hey, guys, well, mostly guys, right? Why don't you go to Australia? 3 times more. That's a really good thing. And of course, we do know that Malaysians do go overseas to do these triple D jobs, but for a heck of a lot more. So I guess what my point, just to cut to the chase, I think the window is closing on Malaysia. It means that the businesses have to start investing in technology, in CAPEX. They need to reform, they need to upgrade. I'm not sure, anyone, well, obviously not anyone here, but a lot of people are talking about exoskeletons for plantation workers. I'm not sure that's the answer, because actually what you want is you want to recognize that Indonesian worker who, in 2 swishes, 30-foot high thing, pay him properly, and probably what a lot of Malaysians from our universities should be doing is, running drones in the like not flying drones, but, ground drones to find out which tree is going to have these ripe fruits, the optimal high income, and then that worker has to move fast. That worker has to move at 2-3 times the speed that he's working right now, where they have him cutting this thing down, then collecting the loose fruits and putting it into a trolley and things. So we really need to rethink the whole way Malaysian businesses are putting things together. And actually, this will, I think, unleash a lot of jobs and opportunities for our youth sector, which I just want to mention that currently, if you look at it at the high level, obviously I'm oversimplifying it, but there's a big difference between male and females. And the youth sector, the young males of Malaysia are the most hit by migrant workers because the job creation is essentially calibrated towards migrant males. And I think if this can change, this will be really interesting. Thanks.
Thanks, Yuling. I think it's a very interesting insights, right, on, and also getting us to rethink, right, the question of skills, right? What does it mean to be high skills and so on? So I'd like to quickly move on to Suhaini, right? So I think COVID-19 has been a very, important event for many of the youth today, right? So it has posed a difficult challenge also to companies and firms. So, as our economy recovers from the pandemic, how has it impacted Malaysian youth getting into employment? Or has the pandemic changed the market fundamentally, and that youth will have to change the way they can get employed?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Zaigan. That's a good question, actually, a prepared question, which no excuse for me not to prepare the answer. But the simple answer is yes, it does have changed the fundamental ways for the youth to see how they need to strategize in order to get into the economy, basically whether by working, finding a job, or doing business, or investing if they have the money. Maybe parents can give them some money to invest, which is what happened to my own company, which during the COVID, the height of COVID, the number of accounts open has increased tremendously, and basically coming from the younger people who maybe just graduated from uni or still in college for that matter, and they made a lot of money. We have our partner Rakuten. Their business profit has zoomed like quadruple of five times. They made a lot of money. For our partner there, as well as for Kenanga Group as well. So I would say our youth are actually, they are smart. And if they were given resources, I think there will be, you can give them that leverage. I think the government had done so. The government had spent a total of almost $500 billion during the COVID, the fund for COVID relief. And if I'm not mistaken, about 15% is for human capital and for subsidizing employment and all those things. That actually has helped. I'm not really saying, this is the job that the government has to do. Their responsibility, their fiscal responsibility in order to spend. Of course, the future problem is, of course, higher debt and all those things. That's where the sustainability that what Dr. Ye mentioned just now, the government needs to improve on policies, on investment policies, encourage entrepreneurship and all those things. And if you look at the numbers, actually, I hate to talk about numbers. I think this is a graveyard shift usually when you give at this time, especially you guys have to sit down through a marathon of series of talk. But I have to mention numbers, since I'm an economist and we are all economists. The unemployment of youth between the age of 15 and 24 pre-COVID was 10.8%, right? Then when at the height of COVID, it was 14.2%, and now it's back down to 12.1%. But if you look at the absolute number, back in pre-COVID, it was below 300,000 unemployed youth between the age of 15 to 24. At the height, it was 362,000. Now, the latest number, August 22nd, is back to above, still above 300,000. So it's not really solved the problem yet. There's still some underlying issues in how to get the youth back into the groove of the economy, getting them a job, or setting small business, or yada yada yada. So if you look at the graduate statistics for 2020, the unemployment rate for pre-COVID was 3.5%. For those who just graduated, the unemployment is just 3.5%. But during the height of COVID, it was 4.3%, right? So it's not and the latest data was, because this is an annual data, so the latest for 2020 is 4.3. Maybe now it has improved a bit. Maybe it's around slightly below 4%, but it's still high. But you look at the labor force participation of youth, the third quarter or pre-COVID numbers was 46%. Now, the latest number, which is a bit lag, is about 41.8%, about 42%. Still, you know, I would say, I mean, still relatively low. So the increased number of youths not even looking for work and hence excluded in the unemployment equation underscore the need to look beyond the official unemployment rate. So basically those people give up, you know, maybe they've gone into gig economy, or they just, you know, do their own forex trading or crypto trading, whatever, whatnot. So, you know, they are the ones who actually, you know, lucky ones who have the resources. I'm talking about those who are in the urban area and to some extent the suburbs. But my very concern is those in the rural area. Yuling did mention about, you know, the Felda, the people, you know, they seem to be neglected, right? And we have not talk about the indigenous, the Orang Asli, the Dayaks, you know, all these people, the Nenayans and all those things. The very poor, put it that way, they are neglected. And if you look at your question is like, you know, what's the effect? Companies are still, you know, I don't think we should look at companies. We should look at states. States, we have high unemployment rate in the poor states like the East Coast, Kelantan, Terengganu, Sabah, Sarawak, and Kedah, the most neglected states, you know, and yet, you know, the government still has not done much, you know, to uplift the status of unemployment of youth. I think I stop here. Maybe, you know, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Swami. I think it also gives us an interesting view, right, on also rethinking, right, the question of unemployment. So I think, given that we are kind of short of time, so I do have a couple of questions, and please keep your questions coming from our Slido on top. So looking at this list, unfortunately, is there a way to put it up, the questions? No, I don't think so. Okay, maybe I'll just read out some of these questions. So, so I think the first question from someone called Handsome Man asked, is it safe to declare that Malaysia's economy has become a post-industrialized economy, considering that services has outperformed manufacturing recently? So I could invite any of the panel. If yeah,
sure. Thanks for the question. I do hear that terminology, you know, post-industrialism and so on, but I wonder what it really means, because it's not either or, right? You know, it's not like manufacturing is no longer relevant. It's the kind of manufacturing that you want to foster so that your economy remains competitive, so that your economy can generate high-paying jobs. And also, at the same time, one thing I forgot to say in my last intervention, you know, when I was talking about services, it's not like, you know, services as is, you know, is the way to go. A lot of the services, 60%, you know, it's a small, you know, food and, you know, the restaurants and shops and, you know, a lot of SMEs, a lot of informal sector employment. So that's not really a foundation of a wealthy, advanced economy. So you do need to find ways to modernize services, and you can even export services. You know, when I first heard about this, and I didn't quite understand what it meant, but, you know, basically you sell your services overseas and then earn, you know, foreign currencies, you know, and you can do this with engineering services, accounting, legal services, professional consulting, and so on. And that's where jobs are. And also, one of the things is that technology is coming to replace some of the jobs. But these are the jobs that are not going to be replaced by technology or artificial intelligence. So those are the areas where especially young people want to think about and invest in, and then, you know, develop into your own careers. One caveat though is that you can no longer fix one career and then stick to it in this changing world. So you have to acquire an ability to learn and continuously reskill yourself, right? You do that, then, you know, industrial or not, I think no longer matters. You know, it's really about, you know, what kind of economy you want so that you can have affluent society where people can have high quality life.
So I think linked to the question of, you know, is the next question into that I think Zillion Invest. Okay, so he asked, while government every year allocate biggest budget on education, why and how can we make Malaysia catch up with regional peers such as Singapore or even other countries such as Thailand and Indonesia?
Okay. Okay. Now, Malaysia, in terms of spending on education, has one of the highest in terms of per capita as well as relative share to total budget. Now, the question is the effectiveness of the spending. So I think the main challenge here is that the outcomes have not been that's not commensurate with the relative share of GDP that you spend on education. So there's a shortcoming that we need to address, and the key focus now, I think it's timely for Malaysia now to focus on, rather than quantity, because now we have enough in terms of supply, to shift the focus to quality. And quality is not just the students, but also in terms of the institutional framework, especially the teachers and the lecturers and all that needs to upgrade their skills and technology, and as well as their knowledge and all that, you see. So that will, the effectiveness of the teaching will have to be really intensified. And of course, from the Education Ministry have shifted towards what you call outcome-based education, and there's very strong push to ensuring that it's well implemented, you see. So I think the key challenge now is to build upon that enhancement of quality all round, and through the entire, in terms of curriculum design, in terms of lecturers, in terms of facilities and all that, you see. So we have a wide range of areas to focus on in order to raise the quality of education, you see. Like in the case of we have a good system in terms of we have public and private universities, and they so-called create that kind of competition, this kind of friendly competition. I think it's the introduction of competition is very important in all sectors of the economy. A strong competition will result in greater innovation and greater efficiency and all that, you see. So we are seeing that, at least in the private sector, although the focus may be slightly different from public universities, but they're all striving to achieve world rankings. So I think that progress, that trust, I think will continue. The question now is whether we will get old before we get rich. So we have to sustain the focus on enhancing the spending on human capital investment, and then of course building up together with not just the supply side, but also importantly focusing on the demand side. And demand side is basically the job creation that actually rests on the types of industries that we are attracting to the countries, especially the high-end industries, whether it's manufacturing or services. They are all, we have to focus on the knowledge-driven, the innovation-driven type of industries, be it in agriculture, mining, or manufacturing or services. So I think that's where we will so-called have this big push in terms of demand that will create a self-sustaining so-called supply side. Will push up the supply side to meet the demand that is needed, you see, for a country to move up the what they call the value chain.
Right, thanks. So I think one last question here, right, before I think we have to end. So the last question is, should the government try to push in increasing the minimum wage for the rakyat, especially youth, considering 1,005 ringgit is way too low to live a comfortable life? Anyone would like to take this question?
definitely. Well, when I started work, that was back in the early 90s. My pay was just 600. Okay, but it was different. But I was a journalist then, right? Before I became, I went into banking, these things. But looking at the, the progress of, income for the entry level is quite sad. And I like to bluntly say this. It's because of policies, of bringing in foreign workers. We do need foreign workers, of course, to do the things that we do not want to do, right? So, but bringing too many and at a high cost, per head, and benefiting, certain entity is the main reason for our, the predicament that we are going through right now, right? And I'm very sad to see that youth who are ambitious, who want to go into, and they found out that, oh, I need to go and do, let's say you want to do accounting, right? You have an accounting degree. You want to do auditing, you have to at least five years earning, just what, below 3 or 4, maybe 5 nowadays. It's not enough if you are in the staying in the city, right? Unless you stay with your parents. And I think the issue of minimum wage is always, it's a perennial issue everywhere you go, and it is compounded by the fact that our ringgit is getting weaker and weaker by the day, and you need to the government needs to do something about it, either fundamentally, policy-wise, or go straight to the main problem of the economy, which is how to move away from the middle income trap, into the high income. Technically, we are not far off from being the high income. It's just a couple of hundred or $1,000 away. I think 14,000, if I'm not mistaken, right? We below, yeah. We are just few hundred or few thousand away. It's not that difficult actually. But if you look at, that's per capita. But if you look at the overall picture, I think there is a need for us to move, higher on the value chain, like what Professor Ye mentioned just now. In terms of so policy-wise, I think that should be the focus in order for us to move forward ahead, and in order to achieve, prosperity, inclusiveness, and all those catchphrases that politicians like to use, and be a nation that grow, and prosper. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, actually, I think there's a huge policy gap in this area. And I think it's really politically driven as well, right? Elections are around the corner. If I look at my little space on commodities, you can see a lot of attention, debt write-off, bantuans, and everything. It's very clear that, this sector is being looked after. And of course, I mentioned commodity prices are multi-year highs. And then we have the other end, inequality, that was mentioned as well. Malaysia is very good at having mega projects, whether, I don't know what it is, more highways, 5G, etc. And huge billions go into those things. But then what's happening in the middle ground? And I think this is where it's very important, because if I'm not mistaken, I read somewhere that 30% of the voters in this election are new voters, and actually in the youth segment. And I think there has been almost no conversation about what is the policy about income and opportunities for the middle income. I think a lot of Malaysia is middle income already, right? Clearly, and you want to go from lower to mid to higher. You want that mobility, and I think this is where people need to really really talk to the politicians about it. And right now, I think don't get stuck with the social media ones. It's just too easy on that front. I think you need to have essentially more of this and more serious conversations, and really find out what these representatives, what do they stand for. why is income so low? I mean, I think we should look at it. Malaysia has really an inordinate high ratio of GDP or whatever we count that is actually corporate profit, and very low on wages and income. And I think that's a very, very high level discussion. And I think you really need to address this to all your representatives. And I think you would find that where we're sitting, Bank Negara, they write about what is the wages that are needed for people living in the urban area. It's very high. It's quite a lot. So the data's there. Pull it together. Make sure you ask the right questions and keep asking. And don't just, I don't know, let the politicians get away with it, because they are really making the policies here. And it's a long time coming. Otherwise, I think I've already mentioned a lot of high-paying jobs in agriculture overseas. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Ling. So we have come to an end to this panel. So I'm very grateful for our distinguished panel for giving us a very enlightened discussion over some of these issues over youth and how we see ourselves in the future. So I think that is all for today for this panel. Thank you very much also to the audience for joining in. And yes, hope to see you soon. And do ask questions, because the next panel should be the politics agenda. So.
Thank you so much for such an insightful discussion. Now we would like to invite Ms. Amira Dayana, Vice President of Perdana Fellows Alumni Association, to present tokens of appreciation for our speakers and moderator.
All right, once again, a very big thank you to our speakers. First to Mr. Yasuhiko Masuda. And next to Mr. Wan Suhaimi. And next to Professor Ya Kim Leng. To Ms. Goh Yu Ling. And our moderator, Mr. Tan Chai Kun. Thank you so much for joining us in this session. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a group photo together. All right, a very quick one.
Once again, a round of applause for our speakers and moderator.
Thank you so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, have you prepared your questions?